We're ready.
Welcome, everyone. Today we're going to embark on an extension of the SWOT analysis that we did last week. So as Ron gives us an insight into the SWOT using his value diamond, I think it's going to be really an exciting opportunity for you to get a better understanding of how the SWOT works and how it ties in with the marketing diamond that he and his compatriots have developed over the years. So with that, Ron, take it away, please.
Yeah, okay, sure. We'll do an overview. Last time, those of you who saw the one last week on SWOT and how to do a SWOT for strategic planning. This is just a little bit of a different twist on how to extend that just a little bit. So I thought we'd kind of go there. It's driven. It also excuse me, there we go. It also has to do with a couple of drivers. Value driver number one, which is market potential, because this perceived customer value concept really is what drives the whole business. The customer drives the business, the niche market drives the business. Sure, you've got to measure that with accounting. You have management issues, all of these things that we've talked about, over the weeks. But when it really comes down to it, an awful lot of what needs to be done, saved cost containment and some of those kinds of things, really is done based on whether or not the customer is happy with what they're being sold. So this is an orientation that really has a lot to do with customers. But it also has to do with, as we talked about last week, the forecast that in reevaluating quarterly, this is another way to do the evaluation. So briefly, what this is a tool, and you can go into the Micro Giants YouTube channel, and you can see that there is one on that's an introduction that we did, the three Consulting Amigos did, where we talked about customers and value and so forth as the value driver number one, and that's a little introduction. We're going to get into a lot more detail here. The concept, very briefly, is that there are four primary elements or attributes to what a perceived value is. And remember, this is perceived. So therefore it's how does the customer perceive value for a company or for a product? And so you've got, of the four, you have quality, service, and price. And those, just about everybody would agree that quality, service, and price is part of how you would calculate value. And that's been done by many other companies in analysis, consultants, et cetera, for a long time. What I found is that those don't really genuinely give you true value unless you include another element. And I used this as a triangle for several years, and I finally got frustrated with it because I never got it to be predictive. In other words, we could take a look at quality, price, and service and see that, we think we should be winning, but we're not. Why is the competitor winning when we are doing better on those three things? And eventually it became clear to me that there had to be something else, and that something else turned out to be image, what I'm calling image. It could be called branding. Branding is included in image, but image really is the overall and complete thought about a particular, either a product or a company that any customer may have. And so that can happen for something as simple as seeing a truck roll up in the front of your business, and what the logo looks like and how clean the truck is. It can also manifest itself in an orderly conference room. And so there's a lot of elements to it, but it also has to do with reputation. Things like, do you have a reputation for quality and good service? And are your prices considered to be fair? Are they a little bit too high, or are they always low? And so it really includes everything within a company. So when I began to use image as one of the four elements or characteristics of perceived customer value, suddenly this began to work. And we could sit with the client and go through it and even do a self-evaluation. And just based on what employees knew about their competitors, they could determine that they were doing better or worse on a particular item. And then you can do the same thing with customers and apply this from customers and surveys and so forth. So you end up building a feedback loop that ends up quantifying how you need to make adjustments to your business. Now, in the SWOT, as we talked about last week, one of the problems that SWOT has is that you have a list of a bunch of stuff. Somebody has to prioritize it, but you haven't really put any numbers to it. You don't know exactly what the most important thing is. You don't really have costs associated with it unless you do the research, and of course you can do that. What this tends to do is give you a numerical value. Now, what we're looking at is a graphical representation here. But when the area is larger, you tend to be winning. And so in this particular case, the red, which would be, say, your company or the company we're looking at, is a little bit bigger potentially than the competitor. But if you take a look at it really closely, you can see that they may be about the same. And the reason is that you're a lot higher in service, you're similar in quality, but they're a little bit better on price and their image is a little bit better. And so, the question there is, well, is the service so stellar that it will actually overcome your deficits on image and price? And each industry will be a little different. If you're in the fashion industry and you happen to be competing against Polo, but your service is better than theirs in, say, your store versus a Polo store, chances are you'll lose. Because if the price is that close, a lot of times people will just go for the Polo because of the status involved. So that's the kind of thing. It happens in cars a lot. You might have the best service department ever, but if your car is ugly or is just not as fashionable as that wonderful Jaguar that you love, you may find that you're going to lose the business because the image of a Jaguar is different than, say, a Toyota. And so these are just a way to take a look at this at each scale and determine very quickly how well you're doing. So this can be done literally by people just simply giving you a number between 1 and 5 and comparing it. I often just will plug this into a spreadsheet and show people the difference and always get, it's always interesting because people have a tendency to know and understand where they're not as good as their competitors. And then again, you can tie it directly into customers as well. In one case, I've got a customer who we've done surveys for a long period of time. And over the years, we have actually developed a numerical feedback system. And so when you do a numerical feedback system, you can come up with something like this, where you can see the numbers. And of course, these are just the same numbers represented over on the chart. But in this particular case, you can see that the quality that they represented themselves to be was an 8.6 versus a 7 and on down. And so you can see those. But the interesting thing is that quality means different things in different industries. And so as a result, we have to think about, well, really, what is quality? What is service? What is image? What are they comprised of? And so what we have here is a little, just a sort of an abbreviation of what each one of these is. First, quality. There are lots of aspects for quality. For instance, in engineering, you may need a better tolerances for some metal piece that you're doing. The fit and finish on a car is part of the quality. Serviceability, how easy is it to service, and does it require a lot of service? And what about the reliability? This is something that in cars is very important to me as an individual, and I would always rate reliability much higher than than image in terms of design styling, because while I'd like to have a good looking car, at the same time, I'm much more interested in it running. And so, I'm not a BMW or a Jaguar buyer, because as much as I think they're beautiful cars, I don't really think that they have the reliability. And so I would mark them lower than say a Lexus. And of course, that particular kind of measurement is something that we can find based on consumer reports. There are other companies that happen to do automobiles, and you can actually see that there are measurements there. Well, individuals have a perception on that, and what is important to individual customer types is really how they are going to score you. Now, keep in mind that you have to know your customer is, because you may find that you actually have some people that say are more interested in one characteristic, and other customers that are less interested than in that particular characteristic. And so it's important to be able to understand that. And in fact, a lot of times, and we do this at the dairy, we actually know the kind of customer that it is, and because we have that in the database. And so when we get a quality assessment from a questionnaire, we know which kinds of customers, which kind of profiles are rating us big or good and bad, so that we can determine which ones we're satisfying and what kinds of things that they really expect. Service is, as you would expect, it is really the delivery of the product or the service as a product, not the service to deliver that product. But you have post-sale and pre-sale. You might be able to measure it by using trouble tickets and in keeping those very carefully stored, so that you can quickly pull them up and compare them, or building reports that are looked at on a quarterly basis. And it's also interesting to be able to measure other kinds of service that might be in specific industries. And each industry does have a little different profile. Image, we talked just briefly about, but it is brand, reputation, et cetera, as I mentioned. Everything having to do with aesthetics, including marketing, but also including all the physical aspects of the building and the people and the whole thing. And then price. Now, price is generally measured sort of at an average, hypothetically on a five scale ranking. A 3 would be in the midpoint. So what we do is we reverse it. So instead of having a 1 as high, a 1 would be low. And so we reverse the scale, and then what that does is that makes it advantageous on the chart to be able to have a higher score, or a lower score, meaning that the price is more favorable. So those are the characteristics. Now, would you guys have any discussion or any questions about this before I move into some of these the sub characteristics of each one of these?
Yeah, I was going to say, what I like about this, it's simple, it's easy to understand, and it can be used for somebody like your dairy, because it's a medium-sized business based on our standards. Also from looking at this, I think it would be relatively simple for us to take a small business, let's say 5 to 20 employees, and create a simple way for them to be able to quantify each of these things and then compare it to their number one competitor. That's what I like about this tool. So as we look at the SWOT, it goes from being something that's generic. While it gives you a lot of data, you can now put it on a measure that gives you internal ideas that's much better.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay, so let's, excuse me while I go ahead then and unshare this. And I'm going to bring up a live spreadsheet and actually show everybody a little bit about how this might work. Okay, my share button, so I apologize. Here we go, it's over here. It disappeared there for a second. Okay, so you should see a spreadsheet pop up.
Yes.
Here in a minute. Okay, so what this spreadsheet does is it drives it drives this right here, which is what I just had up on the screen, and it allows you to go through and break your quality, for instance, into subcategories. Some of the observations I've had over the years are, well, how do we know what quality is? That's not close enough. That's not
right.
And so
yeah.
what happens is you say, well, okay, well, what does quality mean? And so here are some of the sub characteristics of quality: durability, reliability. We talked about fit and finish, engineering, performance, longevity, and you could think of others. And in some industries, there might be some other things that you could put in there. And then what you do is you can turn those into, and in this particular case, we've selected 3 as an example. And so you turn those into questions. And so, for instance, you can say, well, how do you rate the reliability, durability, and longevity of products? And so now we can put that on a scale, and you can use that over and over again. And so your customers would simply go through and you'd come up with an average score. And so in this particular case, they score an 8. And then you do the same for other questions. In this case, we had one for engineering. If precision and tolerance is important, rate the engineering quality. And so they rated them a 9 in this example. And then we also added, on this case, longevity. How well does the product perform? How long does it last? And they rated it as a 9. Now, it's not that easy to get your customers of a competitor to rate their products. I recognize that. And so you have to go to some lengths in order to be able to make that comparison. But an awful lot of times, you can actually ask your customers to compare another competitor.
Right.
And you can get feedback that way. But you can also do it in a few other sundry ways. One way, which is kind of interesting, is that you can actually pay to have a panel on, say, SurveyMonkey. And so and I think it costs about $1 per person. You give them your customer base. They tell you how many customers they have in your area, how many testers they have in your area, and then they literally pay them to answer your questionnaire. So in a case
Wow.
like that, you can ask the same question. Please rate how the product performs, and it would be maybe a computer, or maybe you would compare one automotive shop compared to another automotive shop. And
Right.
so if they had experience with those two, then they could go through and they would rate that. That's a little bit more difficult to achieve, but it is doable. So what I wanted to go ahead.
Ron, the question I had, I noticed you have 8s and 9s there. As you described this, you had a scale of 1 to 5. How did you develop the scoring?
Well, in this particular case, this whole thing is on a 10-point scale. So I apologize for the disconnect. I'm glad you caught that. The only difference is that there's twice as many selections when we have a 10-point scale instead of a 5-point scale. And I
Why
did
did you
build.
move it to a broader scale? Was there, did you have some specific experience that led you to believe you needed more variance or,
Well, no, I find that it complicates it just a little bit when it's a little bit wider. By the same token, when you want to get pretty specific, it's a little bit nicer to be able to have a 10-point scale because of the weighting. And so here we have a way to put how important each of these questions is to the overall value on that particular question, or say the overall quality for a particular company. And so, they would come and say, well, gee, question number 3 is not as important as question number 1. Well, okay, fine. So let's weight that. So that's a 25% weight. This is a 35%. This is a 40% weight. And so what happens here then is that, if you change this number right here to a 4, then because of the weight, it drops you down all the way down to a 7, because you see that's weighted more than
right,
this one is.
right,
And so what it does is, by giving you an opportunity to actually weight each one of these questions, it allows you to get fairly precise. And then because of the 10-point scale, you can get down to decimal points in terms of really comparing where you are and your competitor is. And so we've done that for all 4 of the main attributes, and you have the different questions which are specific to the client, and then when you get all the way down to the bottom, then the calculations will go through, average these out appropriately, and weight them appropriately, and then you've got your answers down here. And so this is where you end up with the comparison. Now, the reason that this is a good tool to feed information into is because when you do this for a while, you get an awful lot of data. And with the dairy, we do probably 5 to 7 surveys a year. Now, many of those surveys are on new product releases. They might be just sent out to a few thousand people. In fact, sometimes new products are only done route by route. And so we'll only ask the questions of the routes that receive the product before releasing the whole product. So it ends up actually being a test for the entire company. And but when we have a major survey, we send it out to thousands and thousands. We like to pick about 20%, and so that's about 6,000 households that we will send a major survey to. And that survey has been largely the same over 25, 26 years. And so we have data that actually shows how the customer service department is doing relative to history. And so that does several things. That gives us a nice way to judge how they're really doing, of course, but it also tells you when something is odd. One time the service portion of their survey came through. Now, and let me just say, we might have 15, now 4 or 5 questions on service. And so they're written in such a way as to not look like they're all focused on just one thing or one on service. And so we pull out certain answers from certain questions in order to be able to create, the matrix and the numbers that we want to, how we want to see them. So we're reducing that down to a 2 or 3 or 4 numbers. So in a case of service, we found that the inbound service, after sales service, had dropped, and we also allow comments. And so we were able to zero in on the dropped scores and find a lot of comments that were very unfavorable, like things like, well, the customer service lady was very rude to me, and those kinds of comments. Or I couldn't get through, she hung up on me, I wanted this and she wouldn't do it, or whatever. Well, we discovered that this was actually all coming from a single employee. And she had affected the score from, they normally would come in at a 9.2, 9.3, but it dropped it down to like an 8.1. Just one out of, I think they had 6 customer service people at the time. So one person was causing that much trouble. And so that person was given a very short period of time to do corrections, and was fired very quickly. Did that work? Well, because it was an important issue, and service is a very, very big deal in that particular industry, because we're selling commodities, and the only way that customers really make a determination on what to buy is based on service. And so we repolled another group, not the same group, but another group of about another 6,000 folks, and we found that they went back up to their old standard. So what we were able to do, and the reason this can be so important, is because it actually ends up being a metric that can find issues. And while it looks fairly general here, it can be fairly specific over here. And so when you extend this spreadsheet and you find that we'll go to a service one since we're talking about it. Just overall, how does a service rate? Okay, we got an 8 on this year, but we had a 7 last year on that specific metric. And we had a 6 the year before and a 5 the year before. Well, that tells us we're going the right direction. And while it seems like a lot of work, I can tell you that the success of the dairy has been based on metrics that are this deep. So there are a lot of little companies that will say, well, we can't do all of that. We don't know how to do it. And I understand that. That's what we're for. But they would not have grown from 2,000 customer families to 30,000 customer families had they not been aware of these things. Yeah. And so we utilized the Value Diamond at least 25 years ago, at least 20 years ago. And so we've been utilizing that for that long. We've been doing surveys for nearly 30 years now. So, so the interesting part about this is that it is a scale that really can make a huge difference. And when you do have an anomaly that pops up because you're measuring it and you're reviewing it, we were talking about how important review is. We're going back to see how we did, and we're able to increase quality, increase service. We've increased image over the years. Price, they're expensive. They're very expensive, but that's okay because the quality, service, and image drive the price. And we're able to sell milk to people at home in glass bottles for, depending on the price of milk, but sometimes it is as much as 250% more than buying a gallon in the store.
Wow.
So, price can be overcome, but it cannot be overcome unless you really have some stellar qualities in this. And the value diagram has really been the tool that has kind of opened up the doors so that we can, not every client is willing to go down this path. Not every client has the administrative capability to actually maintain these systems. But in this particular case, the one that I mentioned, they've been able to do that. And we've had very consistent reports literally for 20, 28, 29 years now. So,
It seems to me that this could be adapted to an industry. So, an example, auto repair or dentistry or convenience stores. Is that an accurate observation?
oh yeah, it's a really good observation, I think, and there could be the advantage of by doing the adaptation uh, to really being able to have multiple input um, uh, sources, I guess. And so by having several clients that did it in one industry, for instance, that would be helpful. By utilizing a general survey that could be shared by, say, five five stores or five restaurants in one area,
Right,
that could be
right.
valuable. That's the kind of thing that could be really useful for a regional area. And that's something that I've thought a lot about, but I've never really had the opportunity to explore that. But I think absolutely it would be fabulous. It would be a little bit like, you know, some of those great companies that measure quality, and there are several of them based on different industries.
Right.
But
And it
be
seems to
about
me
the
this
same. Yeah.
it seems to me this is a product that that really could be used effectively. So, thank you for bringing it in the way you
Sure.
have. As people are looking at this, they can in fact imagine how this might fit in with their particular business sector.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Ron,
Oh, yeah.
I'd like to know how it kind of fits into the strategic planning process.
Right.
How would you incorporate this thinking, this quantified approach for determining how you can become better at what you're doing?
Yeah, good question. Well, for instance, if we just kind of think about that original diamond, which is not up right now, but it happens to show that their image was lacking compared to their competition. Uh, that's the kind of thing that you call a professional to come in and say, look around and tell us what's wrong with what we're doing here. And so a good marketing company would say, show me your materials. I want to see your physical plant. I'm going to look at a couple of your competitors. Tell me as much as you can about your customers. If you really have a true customer profile, you can give demographics and lifestyle categorization to your customers. And that way a marketing person would be able to say, well, the problem is that you've got such crappy logo that you're actually chasing people away. Now
Right.
that's not very often does that something happen, but I'll give you an example. We had a young man on our microgiants the other day who's got a interesting logo as an automotive shop. He has a logo that the O is a hex nut,
Hmm.
and his logo looks fine and you can read it, but the sign maker put the hex nut equidistant in the between the two words. I don't want to say the name of the shop, and as a result, you couldn't read it.
Hmm.
So here's a big sign, on the side of a building, cost who knows, $20,000, $10,000, and because the proportions were not the way the designer designed it, it was not easily
Readable.
understood.
Wow.
And I found it to be confusing, and it immediately, here we're talking about you want your precision car to be done precisely. You had a nice looking building and everything. But when you see something like that, the back of your mind, you kind of go, wait a minute, that doesn't line up right. I certainly hope he knows how to put the nut, on the wheel when he adjusts it. I mean, now that
Right.
might seem a little frivolous, but somebody who's as visual as I am finds a problem with that
Right.
and rates them down lower. And that needs to be, in my opinion, that needs to be fixed immediately.
Well, I think you've just touched on something that Ed asked. Well, basically, what I see the value of this is one of the challenges. You know, you do the SWOT, and what Ed was asking is that, like, you're doing a strategic plan. What's your priorities? Well, if you have data like this, it kind of lays them out for you. You know, if your quality is subpar, particularly related to your competitor, you know, that obviously should be an objective and a priority for the coming year. If you're going to do a strategic plan, is what do we do about improving quality? If it's one of the other factors, you know, it's very easy. Like price is something that you can't control very directly. However, once you have the data, you can begin to look at cost controls and some other ways to bring yourself in alignment with a customer who may be taking your business.
Right.
So that what I see, and you know, that's what we talked about last week is great. Now I have this data. How do I establish priorities? And I think what the diamond does, it enables you to focus more clearly. The thing that's most significant is, can we create some kind of a way in which a business can easily use this? You know, I think your example is very powerful, Ron, but it's one that's well documented. It's 25 years old. It's data that's robust, to say the least, you know. So I think the tool can still be used, even if it's simplified, and give people a much better picture as to where they should be heading.
Well, I'll tell you exactly how simple it can start, and this is the way it always starts, and that is that you simply take a blank one of these, like this. Oh, you can't see my screen, but it doesn't have any markings on it. And all you do is you give a piece of paper to the 3, 4, 5 people around the table who are the managers, and you go through and you say, okay, don't show it to anybody, but I'd like you to mark. I'd like you to mark where your quality is.
Yeah.
And then so you do that on all 4, and then you say, now I want you to draw a line in between. Well, now I want you to do your competitors. Do an X and an O. And now I want you to just draw a line between all the X's and make it a polygon. And literally, that's how simple this is.
Yeah.
And it's remarkable the kinds of things that people will come up with. Yeah. And so the other thing too, which I know you do a lot of, and that is, how do you identify when the, say, managers are beating the same drum as the owner is?
Yeah.
And you can tell right away because they don't scale it the same way, and you go, wow, I mean, I thought this was important, and apparently which is a lot like the assessment that you used to do, which was a great assessment on identifying when managers were not tuned into the owners.
Right.
So it can be used in that, except this is just a little broader, it's more conceptual. And I guess today what I wanted to kind of drive home is that it can be a lot more than conceptual. It can you can actually dig very deep into it. It becomes a very sophisticated tool if the company has the desire to really do that. Not all of them do, but I can tell you from first-hand experience that the ones who learn how to do this become millionaires, and the ones who don't sometimes don't become millionaires.
Right. So it's a great tool. I think it's a wonderful application, tying it in with how you start a strategic plan. Ed, does it, you know, in your context, do you see how that might help, even in terms of a business trying to sell itself? Because basically, if it had it's obviously not an objective, but you know, some sense as to how they were doing it would make their life easier, it seems.
The way I look at this, I'm very impressed with this, and I would love to know more on how to implement it. Because in selling a business, to me, it's all about the customer, and it's all about these factors. And the greater these factors are, the higher the multiple the business could be. So you can really be significantly increasing the value of a business by focusing on these attributes. I think a lot of times people focus on price, and they want to do everything. They want high quality, they want great service, they want a great image, and they want the lowest price. And I think sometimes that kind of defeats the purpose of what they're trying to do. Because I think if you have high quality, high service, and a great image, I think you can charge pretty much whatever you want to.
Yeah.
Right.
And I've actually used this a couple of times to where the client has said, you know, they came down poorly on price. They're obviously the highest price. And I said, your prices are looking pretty tough. People are complaining about them. And you can see where it is here on the chart. And they said, well, we just can't lower our price. Well, okay, you know, we'd have that conversation. Why can't you lower price? Well, you know, and it had to do with a perception that they were providing more, and as a result of providing more, they had to charge more, et cetera. Well, if I lose that battle, and you know, you can go into the whole discussion on break-even analysis and margin, and help them understand how to, you know, what margin should be doing, and try and convince them that they could lower the price if necessary. But what ends up happening on the other side is that I'm able to really convince them, well, then if that's the case, you have to have a perception by your customers that in fact your quality is the best
Right.
and your
Right.
service is the best. And we
Right.
have to use image to do that. And then we've been able to say, okay, let's rebuild your entire image, and let's try to create an image that people will be happy to spend money. Rodeo Drive has an image. People spend money on Rodeo Drive and in those kinds of stores. So we have to do the same kind of thing and sometimes it's true that the price can't come down. If it can't come down, then you better build the other stuff up.
Yeah, if I can use an example here, you know, if you've ever been in Whole Foods or Sprouts, you know, you're certainly not going to pay the same price you do at either Albertsons or even Stater Brothers. But
Yeah.
people will go because they are so impressed with image, with the quality of everything they see. I mean, they will actually tell you it's worth it. I don't mind paying the extra.
No, it definitely to that group of people it is. And the whole organic push that started, you know, years ago, 20 years ago, that really supported the prices, because the excuse was, well, producing really great high quality organic food costs more money.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess
Yeah.
I can deal with that. That's not true today.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Organics,
that's
and actually you can get organics in regular stores today, side by
right.
side with regular, and the prices many times are very, very similar. However, it doesn't matter, because those two stores have already developed an image, and their customers perceive them a certain way, and they are going to get the business anyway, even if the quality is not actually better. But it doesn't matter. It's the perception that means
Right.
everything.
I think if I can share this story from John McKay's book, Conscious Capitalism, in which he had just started the business in Austin, Texas. I mean, he and his wife got some help from their dad, and they started this little co-op store. And you know, it had grown into, it was about 3 years old, but you know, they had a real good customer base. And Austin has a river going through the middle of it, and they had a flood, and literally, I mean, it just destroyed his business. Within a matter of days, the customers came and said, "You got to open this store again. We'll help you." I mean, it's just a wonderful story of, if you have a strong customer base, you know, they'll do a lot for you. And I would imagine the dairy must be an awful lot like that, Ron.
Yeah, there are people now. A lot of people are fickle. When you have, you know, 30,000 customers, you're going to get the odd one that's going to be completely unreasonable. And their policy is, hey, whatever you want, you got it. If you don't
Yeah.
want to pay for it, you don't pay for it. If you want us to bring you another one, we'll bring you another one. It doesn't matter. We're going to take care of it. Because the truth is that the cost of replacing the product is so much smaller than the cost
Replacing
of
the customer.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, or an unsatisfied customer who's yelling,
Right.
you know, to
Yeah.
all of their neighbors.
Yeah.
So that's, but yes, they have had cases where there were floods, and they've had snow events where Longmont Dairy wasn't actually hurt, but the trucks were having trouble getting in, and that the customers would say, okay, I'll cross the bridge and come over to such and such, and I'll take all of the stuff from my neighborhood back
Yeah.
because I know you can't get in. I mean,
Yeah.
those,
Wow.
so
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
have had those kind of heroic customers that have said, we know that you're hurting, but whatever it takes, we'll do it.
Yeah.
And
Isn't
of
that
course,
cool?
through COVID, the business literally over a period of 10 days went up 35%. And
Yeah.
cows don't just produce more milk when you ask them to. And so there was a problem with milk. And
Yeah.
customers understood, and they figured out a way to ration it. And they had a waiting list that lasted for about 2 months.
Wow.
But people were, people were really very, very
Accommodating.
accommodating and
Yeah.
pleased that one would
Yeah.
would try that the dairy would try so hard.
Yeah. Cool.
I
Well, that's a
think,
good story.
a lot of the businesses that I look at, the small businesses, I go into them and I see they have unbelievable quality, or they have tremendous service, great image, but they're afraid to charge more. And they're barely making it, and they have this great opportunity in front of them. And a lot of times they don't charge, if there's a service business in particular, if they don't charge for all their time, they're not getting the full benefit of what service they're providing. So a lot of times you're right. Sometimes you have to bring the price down, but sometimes I have actually recommended that they raise their prices.
Oh, well, I've done that many times, and there are cases where times when people's prices are too low, and that the perception of quality is low too, just because their prices are low. So people are actually not as rational as we'd like to believe, and so part of the marketing game, if you will, is to try and find that threshold where the customer believes the price should be and they're happy paying it. Yes, there are customers that have a profile that kind of puts them in a shopper's deal. They want the best price, and then so you have to learn to be able to provide opportunities for them to get cents off or a special price or whatever. And those are certain businesses that's part of that business in order to be able to do those things. But for the most part, I've experienced products when I was in the retail business that didn't sell at the regular price. And instead of lowering the price, we increased it a third and they started selling. It does happen.
Being a finance guy, I've been pretty cheap in my life when I first started out in particular. And everything was based on price, price, price. Boy, I've learned a lot since then. And when you start adding up all the costs, when people come in, they don't show up on time, they screw this up, they screw that up, you got to redo it. When you look at the total cost of something to get it done right, reputation means a heck of a lot. And a company that's going to back up their services, and once you get them in the door, it's going to be handled right, quickly, because time is money. And
Right.
A lot of places, they don't do it in time. So a lot of these folks, in my opinion, are like go-to guys. When other people fail and you want to fix it, you go to this guy. Well, there ought to be premium pricing if you do that, because this guy's doing something above and beyond his competitors.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly.
That was a nice segue, Ed. It's almost 4:10, guys. Ron, I think you did a great job. I hope that people will listen to this. There's real value in this. And for those of you listening, stay tuned next week. We'll be back with another episode of the 3